as I started to like look through, your podcast, and as I started to look through a lot of things that, because you got some good shit out there. I mean, people that are listening, like just Google Sam Smith, and you're gonna find the famous artist, Sam Smith, and then. Actually, I told my wife, she was like, "Who you have on the podcast?" I was like, "Sam Smith." She was like, "No way." I was like, "Yep, all of him." Anyways,
so good.
Yeah. Anyways, here's what I found interesting, and this was actually off a YouTube video that I found. Someone asked you, it was like a Big Dawgs video, and they said, "Hey, what do you feel like paraphrasing, what do you feel like your expertise was in?" And you answered it not in a way I thought you were going to answer it. You said, getting athletes to something of the nature, like discover themselves and tap into their potential. Was not expecting that. I'm thinking you're going to say, my background in golf gives me this, or I'm a weightlifting specialist, blah, blah, blah. But you say something that I did not even think was going to come out of your mouth. I'm so curious to hear, like, why that? Why do you feel like that's your expertise?
Why do I feel that's my expertise? Well, I think it's a good question. I'm trying to think of like what's a real, because the short answer would be, I just feel I connect really well with people. So I can communicate well with people. And when you can communicate well with people, you can get them to open up. And when you get them to open up, you can help them explore other areas of themselves that they otherwise can't, because they're being open with someone, and it's tough for us to be open with people. So I think I'm just naturally, or maybe not even naturally, but maybe through my life experience, I've become fairly comfortable at speaking with people and getting to know them and connecting with them. And in coaching, as you probably know, that's a big part of it is how do you get somebody to buy in? How do you get somebody to trust you and believe that the plan we have and the approach we're taking is the most optimal for this individual person?
I mean, have you always been that way? Like, where do you think that comes from? Like, were you just naturally like I know people that are just naturally like curious people, and that's awesome. But were you naturally that way, or is that something that you developed and you realized in yourself?
I don't know if curious would be the right word, but I'm in my head a lot, and I've been since I was young. I've always been in my head, and in hindsight, that was probably the limiter in my golf career that prevented me from making it a career. But that was probably for a purpose, which is why we're talking now. And I know in college, I did have a big moment where I came into school and I had a really good junior career, and I had a lot of pressure and expectation to be a really great collegiate golfer. And my first year and a half weren't that great. They were okay, but they weren't at the level of expectation that I, of course, set on myself. And it was like I was really battling, you could say depression or really high anxiety over like, what do I do? Because I've always known myself to be this person and this athlete, and now I'm not that at all. And I had no tools on how to handle that at the age of 19. Of course, I'm 19. I don't know much of anything.
Right.
So yeah, that's the best part.
Limited life experience. Let's be honest.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, 100%. So thankfully, at the school I went to, we had a lot of resources to help all the athletes at the University of Southern California. And so we had a sports psychologist that we had access to, and nobody on the team really used him. But I was interested and wanted to speak to someone. I think that was a lot of it is I just wanted somebody to talk to about this, because my coach definitely taught me a lot of positive things that I use today in my practice. But there was one area that wasn't his strength that even if he did have it, I don't think it would have made him the coach who he became. And he was a very successful coach and still is. And he wasn't the type of guy you would go up to and talk about these things. Like it was more you know, you're there, you work hard, keep your head down, you keep grinding, you know, you push it down. You don't bring it to the surface. So
Right. Exactly.
yeah, and I'm just more on the other end of the spectrum in some regards. And so I reached out to this guy, and and he was a sports psychologist, had his PhD. He taught at Long Beach State. He'd written a couple books. He's a very well-regarded expert in his field. And so he helped start asking me questions and getting my mind to look at my sport differently. And in that process, my collegiate career started to exponentially rise. Like I started to fulfill the expectations I initially had. And then I became an All-American, and I won a tournament. I had a really great final 2 years of my collegiate time at school, so much so that I wanted to pursue professional golf. So that's what I did for a year, because I put myself back in a position to show potential in this sport. And so that whole experience, I think, in reflecting on your question and also in the past, I think that was a large part in me seeing how powerful communication and uncovering what we have inside, what it can give people. And so, like, if I didn't have that guy, his name was Kevin Sverduke. He still practices, I think. If I didn't have Kevin, my golf career in college probably would have been mediocre, okay, and then I would have moved on. But instead, I finished really satisfied with my college career. Like, there was no stone unturned, and just the amount I got out of myself was astronomical. And so now I bring that to my practice, where I feel very pulled to help people who reach out to try to open or tap into them with this that they have inside, that they probably haven't experienced or realized yet. And so I think that's my area of expertise, let's say.
Yeah, man, that was like such a good answer. Like, I mean, you interview enough people and you hear enough answers of things and you go, damn, that was like just the storytelling. And I think that's why if, you know, for people listening, we're going to get into the CrossFit stuff because that's what obviously Sam's really well known for, but his, I think, ability, and I think you guys just saw it, his ability to tell some stories is phenomenal, and in a very anecdotal way that you really get something from. And anyways, I just that saying, real recognizes real, so.
Well, as you know, like humans, we learn through storytelling. And so especially as a coach, always trying to use stories to get a point across or to explain something to people will always resonate on a deeper level than just telling them how it is. And so I think I've always learned well from stories. I mean, I love books that they use story to explain the deeper meaning of the book. And so as I do, my own reflection on my life or what I've done, I really try to find the story, let's say. And obviously that one, it sets up really well. But I mean, with a lot of the clients I've had and everything, there's always so many good stories, and you remember stories, at the end of the day, it's like
you do. Yeah.
Yeah. So
you mentioned something that I didn't want to gloss over. You said that you kind of went through a time during your golf career that maybe you're a little bit more anxious, or I don't know if you used the word depressed. I don't want to put words in your mouth if
I
that
did.
was the case, but
yeah.
Okay. I thought I wrote that down. I'm curious why, because I know some golfers. I don't know a lot of All-American golfers, but I do know some, and I do know they all describe it as a very mental game. Some could argue that in a way CrossFit is a lot like that. It's just a lot more physical.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot more metabolic. Anyways, what do you think that was from? Why do you think that? What was stemming from that?
Well, teenage kid, smaller town, you accomplish things that not very many athletes in your town have done, in your state. I was really good relative to people in my state, but I think I got built up really high as a kid. And then you take a kid who is more curious, who is more introspective, who is more introverted at times. It allows for a lot of space and ability to run negative narratives that like, well, what if this doesn't happen? Or what if this happens? Or what, so the level of awareness I had that I wasn't really aware of yet was making me very susceptible to self-sabotage, which is essentially what happened. Like I still remember the start of my sophomore year, we played a practice round at this course, and we always did a birdie game in the practice round. So hopefully some people know about golf that are listening, but
oh yeah,
a birdies. Yeah. So in the practice round, whoever made the most birdies got a free sweat. We had like this swag bag, and you get to pull something out of it when you got back home. So I made like 8 birdies at this course. I was playing so good. Ooh. And so we're starting it out. Next day, I'm excited. I'm like, all right, here we go, new season. And I shot. The weather was significant. It was windier. It was colder. The previous day, perfect conditions. But I think I shot like 90. Like I shot 90. I was like in last place, and I broke down after the round because I was like in shock. But the reason I say that is I still remember being on the first few holes, and I had like so much pressure and tension over every shot that I couldn't hit anything. Like all I saw was where the ball could go that you didn't want it to go. I couldn't see the shot I wanted to hit. And I think that just came back from, like I said, you create this story of who you are, what you should accomplish, and then if you show any sign of failing or veering off that course, you instantly unravel it into, or I should say, you ravel it into this like this catastrophe story, and now you're paralyzed. Like you can't do anything. And like I said earlier, I didn't have a person or a way to handle that situation at the moment. I didn't have the tools yet, the cognitive resources. So it just resulted in being anxious, a little bit more depressed, just like unsure of myself. So I think that was, and I wouldn't say funny, but what's ironic is there's a lot of high-level collegiate athletes that fall into the exact same circumstance in various sports. And so, and especially at my school, just because in any D1 school, it's like your family, your school, your community, your state, there's a lot that's placed on a teenager whose brain is, 75% developed. And unless they're an idiot, which some of them are, and they become great athletes, but that doesn't mean all elite athletes are idiots, so you don't want to take it that way. But at bottom, there is a level of awareness that as you start getting into that, it becomes detrimental to performance. And some of them are blessed that they stop at that border. It's like, I don't go any further than that. And that's just who they are. And then some of them go further, and usually they become coaches. And you need that. Like you need to be able.
That's so true.
You have to have both sides of it, because if you can't go past that border, then you won't be able to relate to the athlete you have who will, and then you're going to really pigeonhole yourself with who you can work with and who you can effectively help. So, a little long-winded, but I think that would be how I would answer what you asked me.
So as you, Kevin was his name, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So as you said very specifically, you said Kevin gave me some, or Kevin posed some questions that maybe gave me some frameworks of how to think about some certain things, and then you went on to say about how that kind of influenced in some way what you do today in coaching CrossFit athletes. What are the parallels that you kind of drew from that?
Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna try to think more broadly, because of course context is very helpful. So let me use golf as an example, and then I'll try to parallel it to CrossFit. So say you're on tee box, there's water down the left, there's OB on the right side of the fairway. So it's like, all right, well, I got to hit a good shot. You're nervous, third to last hole, you're in a good place in the tournament, you don't want to blow it. Your mind starts to think about, oh, I could go in the water, or what about OB? It's like, ooh, I don't want to do that. And so one of the things Kevin helped me start to notice was you need to recognize the potential outcomes, good and bad. It's like, yeah, I could hit it in the water, and I notice the water, I see the water, it's there. I don't, I'm not trying to avoid it mentally. Like, I need to acknowledge it. And then there's OB, I acknowledge that, I see it. All right, it's there. Okay. Now let me come back to, well, what shot do I want to hit? What's my strategy? What's my plan? So with CrossFit athletes who are going into a competition or going into an event, there's a lot of anxiety, there's uncertainty. What if I don't do well? What if I fail? What if I hurt myself? So you want to acknowledge the uncertainties, the things you can't control. So, it's off the plate, or I don't say off the plate. What would I say? You acknowledge it so it's known, but then you come back to, well, what can I control? So controlling the controllables, which is something I post about a lot and I talk to a lot of my clients about, is controlling the controllables. So once we know what the stressor, the anxieties are being driven from, we come back to what we can control. And so with golf, I'd be behind the ball, I'd pick my target, I'd start to create the shot I wanted to hit, I'd start to rehearse the swing I wanted to make, and then, because every golfer has a very specific pre-shot routine, and so for me, I would stand behind the ball, I would watch the shot in my mind's eye, I would take a couple deep breaths, and then I'd walk into the shot, and then I'd make a very committed swing to a committed target, and then that was kind of my process. And so the process of controlling the controllables, acknowledging the anxiety and the uncertainty, can kind of help you move through that uncertainty a little bit more effectively. And so that's how I frame it for the CrossFitters, is acknowledge what you can't control. Even play it out if you want. What happens if you fail? What happens if you get hurt? What happens if you don't perform well? Like, that's another way you go about it, is you play it all the way out, and that helps lessen the load on the system. Then you come back to, okay, well, what can I control? My strategy, my preparation, my warm-up, my fueling between events. What am I focusing on in the event? And so getting people really connected to that helps kind of zone them in, quote unquote, and allow them to perform the way they should perform. I don't like using the word should, but the way that they lets them perform to the level they're capable of. That would be a better way of saying it.
You've touched on this a lot, and just even in our conversation, and certainly in conversations in past, you brought it up here, the story that you tell yourself. And I had a podcast that I talked with Fee Sagafi at length about this thing. That the story you tell yourself, it does not cloak reality. It in fact creates it in so many different ways. Yet, in so many athletes, and I know I can relate, and it sounds like, goodness, you can relate with the golf. Your very successful golf career. Like, we as human beings are constantly looking, and this ties together beautifully, for a story to tell ourselves. Because, like you said, we latch on to those things. We want a story. They're easy to remember. They're easy to relate to. Yet oftentimes we get stuck in these past negative loops of things that have happened in our past, and I find that those things are debilitating to people. Like, they struggle to get out of them. And we all come into whatever endeavor we're doing in life with different types of baggage. Is a negative word and has a negative connotation. But I'll say it this way: experiences from our past that we put these negative story loops on, these negative perspectives, or have these negative perspectives of. And I'm wondering, as a coach, how do you help someone navigate that? Because we're all, like, there's all limitations, right? Physical, mental, emotional. But the reality is, like, physical, there's only one way to get over them. It's to continue to do them, or continue to, it's like this, stoicism. The only way to get to the other side is through. That is the only way. And I personally believe in that. But with someone with maybe a mental or emotional block, it's a lot different. It's not just like, well, just tough it up and throw some dirt on it, kid. It's like, no, that's insensitive, and it's the absolute opposite of vulnerability, So, as you, I'm sure, hear so many different backgrounds, so many different stories, so many people's different childhoods. and it sounds like you get into this with some of your clients, like you
Mm-hmm.
want to know the man behind the mirror, so to speak. How do you approach
Mm-hmm.
that with people?
Yeah, well, you hit a great point. We need something to do at bottom. Like what are we going to do with our time?
Accurate.
Like we need something to do, and we have to create a story behind what we're going to do. And so you're right. We all have varying stories, and a lot of people have a story that's not really helping them. It's not getting them to where they want to go. And for whatever reason, because it could be for a multitude of reasons, they hold on to that story and they assume, like you said, that this is reality. This is the way things are. When in reality, you can change your story however you want it to be. It's not easy. There's a great book, The Power of Story by Jim Loehr. He's a famous sports psychologist. He's coached more than like 15 world number ones in 15 different sports in his career. Like, he's a savage. So his book's a great resource. He would be great to talk on the podcast. You would love speaking with him. Jim Loehr,
I'm writing that down.
Loehr, The Power of Story. That's one of his books. He has like 15 books. Anyways,
Loehr.
so he talks about story, and he talks about the power of your story. And as I said, a lot of people have stories that aren't helpful for the goals they have. So as a coach, it's really important to listen to the language people use when they communicate with you, when they talk about their goals, when they talk about their past, their training history. All these things start to create a framework, or not a framework, but they create I don't want to use story again. They start to create a list of ways in which this person communicates, and then you start to parse out what are the common threads. And then that's their narrative. That's their story. That's what they believe. And if it's not aligned with what you need for this goal, then you got to help them work on recreating that. So that could look, one thing that came to mind was if somebody keeps saying, I am this way, like, yeah, I always mess up in the last two workouts of the competition, or I always messed up in the final inning in all our baseball games. If they repeatedly say that in conversation, then now you know that they believe that's a part of who they are. And so as a coach, you could say in conversation, I noticed that you use this term a lot, and you frame it that you are this way, like it's fixed. It's not malleable. Do you notice that? And then they probably won't notice that. So, and this falls under a NEPA framework, which is from CCP and OPEX, where you notice something, you explain it to them, then you prescribe an alternative, and then you put it into action. So that's the NEPA framework. So as a coach, you notice language that's not beneficial for this person, you explain your perspective, you listen to how they're seeing it, and then you try to create an alternative that's more positive, or more, I don't want to use the word positive, but it's more productive for that person. And then you hold them accountable. So you're checking in on that. You're revisiting it. You want to make sure that it gets ingrained. You don't want to just, one off it, because then that's not very beneficial.
This is a great segue to talking about specifically the relationship with coaches and athletes. And I'm curious how much of what you see when coaching an athlete is you would deem more mental than physical. Meaning, what I'm saying is you see that they, or you deem, or you, whatever metrics you're using, you say, hey, the physical capacity is there, but what we're missing is this mental piece. I'm fascinated with the mental side of what it is we do as CrossFitters, because let's be honest, CrossFit's it is what it is. It's an endurance sport. It's a pain sport. Like, it just is. And oftentimes what I've found, the people with, Tia really hasn't opened up much about this, but you start hearing Matt talk about the things that he would do and the character traits and the habits that he developed. I mean, it's weird to say, Matt Frazier developed Matt Frazier. Is that like
100%?
Matt Frazier verbed the noun,
Yeah.
Like, it's weird to say that, but it's true. And I'm curious, as you coach people, and I think you coach more than competitive CrossFit. I think I've heard you say you coach like GPP as well, like or in general. Is that true? Okay.
Yep.
How much of it do you see is and correct me if you don't believe this is the correct term, that the mental capacity is more so holding the person back than their physical capacity, and maybe you don't.
So with the mental capacity, let's say, is very relevant for those who are competing or who are starting to compete at a higher level. So the further you get into any physical endeavor, you now start to call more on the mental side, because the physical characteristics are fairly similar across the board. There might be some discrepancies, whether somebody can run like a gazelle versus somebody can lift like a gorilla, but you average it across when everybody starts at the games, they're fairly close in physical characteristics, but the physical characteristics are expressed through the mental characteristics. So as you said, Matt Frazier created who he is in order to achieve what he wanted to do. So now 60% of my clients did the Open this past year, and 58 of them made it to the quarterfinals. But 40% of them are normal people, GPP, who want to feel good, have good balance training, want some accountability. Like so I don't solely work with games athletes or solely work with, competitors. So I put it in a couple buckets. So for the people who are competing, as they develop and start to compete more, even those that are, barely making to the quarterfinals, we inevitably will talk more about the mental side for them, because I want to help them recognize there are things that they can work on that will improve outcomes in performance and in competitions that aren't physically related. And so that's just a very contextual process, because some people need a lot less than others, and then some people need almost solely that, where it's like all of our conversation needs to be around self-talk and their process and how they're handling challenge and where they see themselves and in relation to their competitors and in the sport and in their career, all that stuff. So I think it's very relative to where they are in their pursuit towards their potential. And then for other people, those that aren't competing, the conversation is more around how does fitness fit into your life to create a very fulfilling life that's balanced and supportive of everything else you care about. And then, and that's probably the extent of it, unless they want to talk more about stuff in that arena. But usually it's more for people who are in the competitive landscape. But I mean, as you know, like physical challenges indirectly help you build better mental tools, cognitive tools. That'd be a better term, So that's obviously a very good indirect benefit of physical challenges, which is why you and I both love fitness and exercise, because there's a lot that you get from it other than being healthy.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, exactly. And it's, and I should have given more context there. And I think that most people listening to this are on the more competitive side of things, trying to get a competitive edge. And and I'll take the responsibility that I should have given more context in that regard. I listened to a Joe Rogan clip. I don't know where I saw it. I think it was Instagram. Doesn't matter. But point is, the Joe Rogan clip was something of the nature of doing hard things, about the reason that we do hard things. And he specifically talked about CrossFit, jiu-jitsu, things that are physically demanding on the body. And he said something that I thought was interesting. He said, doing hard things are essentially a reset for the body and the mind in terms of our perspective on life. It's like and I think this is both for competitive folks, and I think it's for GPP, just general folks that go, hey, you know what? I want to look good. I want to feel good. I want to live a good life. All those things. It's man, when, and look, I've coached at gyms as I know you have. When you see, this is super motivating to me. When I see that mom of three just like crushing some, whatever, burpees. It doesn't matter what it is. And like, like her story, and she's like crushing it in there, and not to just kill herself for the sake of killing herself, but like to get a good workout. And then afterwards, she's like, man, that was so awesome. I didn't think I could do that. Like, I've never done more than 8 burpees or whatever. It's like that same like very primitive mindset begins to get bigger and bigger and bigger as the stakes get bigger. It's like, man, I didn't know I could place top 200 in the open. Man, I didn't know I could make it to a semifinal. And and what I find from not just coaching people, but then being in the sport itself, it all of a sudden starts to reframe things in everyday life that we all deal with, whether it's relationships, whether it's at work. And all of a sudden, the things that seemed hard a year ago or 6 months ago, it's not that they're still not tough. It's that the way that we go about them, it's that the way that we perceive them, all of a sudden starts to change. And I find that to be one of the most rewarding side effects. I don't have to motivate competitive CrossFit athletes to go to the gym. They just go to the gym, right? Yeah. Of course, that conversation is different with GPP as we've discussed. But nonetheless, I think the side effect of going to the gym is almost universal, and it's that doing hard things produces something in the human body and the human psyche that people that don't do hard things, it's just, it's not the same.
Yeah. Well, and we can revisit the previous question if you wanted to. I don't want you to think we're done with that one.
No. Please go ahead.
But just to add on to what you just said is our lives are becoming more comfortable just with technology. So we're way more susceptible to choosing comfort over struggle or strain. And so that's why you need physical challenge to create that balance you just mentioned, because otherwise the pendulum's swinging way too far to the other side. And now granted, if I'm going to use that analogy, you don't want it to swing too far one way, and then also you don't want to go too far the other. You got to find the sweet spot. Right. Otherwise, either end of the spectrum, you're in trouble. So, I think that's partly why the fitness culture has exploded in the last couple of decades, is I think as we continue to move more towards comfort and pleasure, so to speak, we need a reset. We need a challenge to humble ourselves and keep things in perspective. Because, I love what you said, because I kind of try to live by this, is that the challenges I face physically help create the mental resilience I need, that when I face real challenges in life, I can handle them more effectively than others. And then those things don't allow me to go into the doldrums, or that's the word, for like extended periods of time where, I need extra support, or I need to like be alone for 3 months to like regather myself. Like, I can handle, because bad luck's going to come to everyone. So you need to be ready to handle it so you can keep moving forward, so that when you get the good luck, because we all get good luck, you can maximize that. And I'm taking that from Jim Collins, because that's a concept he highlighted in one of his books about what separated great companies from mediocre companies. Was they both got the same amount of luck, but great companies, the return on their luck was significantly more. And then when they had bad luck, they used it to learn, but they kept moving forward, and they ensured that they were building resources and scaffolding to support the onslaught of bad luck that would inevitably come. So that mirrors well into normal life as well.
It sounds like, from just hearing you quote quite a few things, it sounds like you read a lot. I'm just picking up on
I love reading.
On the cues. Okay.
Reading's the best way to think. Like, when you read, you can actually think about things, and you you disconnect, you get away from everything. You're taking, it always humbles me when I try to write blog posts, or I'm writing things or education material for OPEX. Writing is so hard. It's so hard to be clear and articulate. And that's the humbling thing, because then when you read a book and you realize why it takes people 3, 4, maybe almost a decade to write something, because it's so challenging. And then when you read it and you're just blown away with like, wow, that made such perfect sense. There were so many takeaways. I can't believe they wrote that. So you're essentially taking a book from someone, and that's like 40 years of their life of knowledge and experience and wisdom, and you get to absorb it. I mean, that's the best. That's all you can ask for, and then you get to apply it. You get the cliff notes, and then you can go and apply it to your life. So reading's awesome. And I've read multiple times quotes from like Charlie Munger, that who's a very successful investor. He and Warren Buffett are partners.
Oh yeah.
That, for your listeners, in case they didn't know that he's never met anyone in any industry who wasn't successful, who wasn't what's the word? I'm trying to think of an adjective for this, but I'm blanking. That didn't read all the time. It's not that you have to like
reader.
That's a perfect word. I was thinking of something else, but it's not that you have to like virtue signal that I read a lot, but there's value for yourself in the process. You don't need to tell people, but do it for yourself. And do it because you want to learn. You're going to die one day, and there's so much great learning and insights and literature that you won't be able to read because you're on Instagram or YouTube too much. So, pick up the book and read it. It's going to be better.
Actually get the damn book.
Yeah, seriously.
Like, Jesus. Here's a little hack for people that are listening. And there's been a bunch of studies. This is proven to work. Or I should say your retention of the knowledge is proven to be higher if you will listen to the book and read it physically at the same time. Your retention is proven to be 2x higher. Now, here's a growth hack, because all you people go, well, Micah, I don't have time. Okay, there's this thing called Audible out there. It's amazing. Okay, you get it through like Amazon Prime, I think. Anywho, you can put that thing at like 1.5x the speed, and you can read, and it'll read aloud to you at 1.5x while you look at the paper. It's amazing. Anyways, that was free to all you people listening today. But like, I'm just trying to point out, like, what he's saying is so freaking accurate. I can't. Anyways, you guys need to pick up a book. Anyways,
well, one point to that you said that I loved was, I don't have time to read, because that's an excuse I hear a lot, and it's an excuse. It's not a reason to not read. It's because you're prioritizing something over another. So being able to spend time reading, there's an investment of time, which is the only thing that we all have an equal amount of. Well, not necessarily equal, but you know what I mean by that. It's
24 hours in a day for everybody.
Yes, let's go with that. So you need to, if it's a priority, that's the starting point. You got to figure out what's a priority for you. And so for me, I love to read. I love to learn. I'll get anxious if I'm like not learning or reading. And is that a good or bad thing? It doesn't really matter. Let's say it's not a debilitating thing where it drastically impacts my work or my mood, but it's just something that I have this little tick that's always ticking, like, make sure you're reading, make sure you're learning, continue to upgrade yourself. And so I set aside time in my day in order to read, and I stay disciplined with that. And I make sure it's the same location, the same time, and it's always like there's a very specific approach to it. And that's one way you form behaviors more effectively that lasts, is there's, you set the environment for what the behavior is going to be. So it's like, I have the chair, and always at this time, I always sit down to read, and I read for this long, and I always have my water next to me, and my phone's away. So it's like you want to set the environment to support the behavior you want. And so with reading, it's the same thing. You got to find a reason to do it, and then you got to create a context and environment to support it so you can maintain it for forever.
What he just said beautifully and simply summarized the best-selling book, Atomic Habits, that everyone should go read. Everyone should read. If you're listening to this podcast and have not read Atomic Habits, I don't, like, you're missing out on life. Like, I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's an amazing, amazing book. The things that I changed because of that were like No, they weren't. They were mind-blowing. I didn't think it was going to be so easy as a relative term. But, it does matter, I think, how driven you are. And, like, there's some genetic things. But I think and believe deep down, deep-seated in my heart, that book outlines habits better than any book I've ever read to date. And we'll see if something comes along, but amazing book.
Very good book. I agree.
Yeah. So I want to spend the back half of this as we're in the final stretch. I want to talk specific CrossFit stuff. Look, I could go 5 hours on mindset, and I'm gonna message this Lear guy and see if he can jump on the podcast, because I think that would be fun. So thank you for that, Rec.
My pleasure.
But I do want to talk about CrossFit, and obviously most of the people listening are competitive CrossFit folks. They compete in the Open every year, quarterfinals, and obviously have aspirations for semifinals and onwards. There's a couple things that I found that were very, very interesting that you mentioned in earlier podcasts and videos, and this was one of them. You guys were talking about strength and capacity, and one of the things that you said was that capacity and muscle endurance are undervalued as traits that need to be developed in the sport of CrossFit. And obviously feel free to give some context, because in that, and I don't know if you remember the exact conversation, but in that conversation, you guys were talking about strength-specific structural balance and those types of things. So feel free to give as much context as you need. But I thought that was very interesting, because I don't hear that message being preached a lot, so to speak.
Yes. And you mentioned earlier, which I agree with, is we have to start with clear definitions on what we're talking about. Anytime you have a discussion on anything, you always 100%. Need to lay out your presuppositions. Otherwise, you're going to have a horrible conversation. So that's a life tip for everyone, is if you're going to get into a discussion, make sure you're both on the same page with what you're going to talk about. So you mentioned earlier CrossFit is an endurance sport, which I 100% agree. It's not a power sport. And it's not like, in academic definition, it's not necessarily an endurance sport as running is or long distance cycling, but suffice to say it is an endurance sport. Now, in an endurance sport, what is the intention, or what's the goal of the sport? Well, you're trying to finish or do something in less time than someone else, usually. And usually it's a large amount of work, a big task, and you're trying to finish it before somebody else does, or you're trying to do more of it than somebody else does in a fixed time window. So that is CrossFit. So at bottom, you have to prioritize or have the scaffolding of muscle endurance. So that, what is that? Muscle endurance just simply means how enduring are your muscles when they work. So doing, for example, say you had to do 50 pull-ups, 50 burpees, 50 wall balls, 50 box jumps, 50 kettlebell swings for time. That was a chipper. It's a lot of reps. That's going to really challenge your muscle endurance. You have these big extended sets. How well can your muscles handle doing a repetitive pattern for extended periods of time? And the elite do that really well. They just, as you've probably heard many times, they turn it into aerobic work. What does that mean? That means they make the contractions very sustainable, so they can do a lot of them repeatedly over and over again. And then when you do it repeatedly and sustainably, it's less fatiguing and damaging on your system. So what does that mean? You can do more often. You can lift at a greater percentage of your max because you're less fatigued. And this is the hallmark of those that are elite at the sport. And this is the beacon that you're trying to aim for in the sport, is you're trying to make these contractions more sustainable over time. And so that's why I say that capacity, so think of a 5K row or a 30-minute row for max meters, and muscle endurance, so think of the open workout, 21.1. Well, I mean, I don't want to get into semantics, because you could discuss at length, like, well, what is muscle endurance here? Or is this muscle endurance? So it's very context dependent, but let's move past that. So the point being, at bottom, you need to be cultivating these aspects for the sport if you want to move towards your potential in the sport. And I think people get connected or more easily attached to, I want to get stronger, or I need to get my lifts higher, or I need to squat this amount. Now, depending on your goal, there are requisite levels of strength you need, but at bottom you still need to have the capacity, because let's look at the Open 21.1 or 2021. You didn't get to express any strength or power until the very last event, and it was under fatigue from a lot of pulling, a lot of fast squatting volume, incomplete rest. So what's the point look, like, all things being equal, if you just focus on strength for 9 months or 10 months and then you do that, you're going to be destroyed. And additionally, you probably don't have the supporting structures to recover from each week you did the Open. So those first 2 weeks, you're probably operating at 80% of your capabilities by that last week. So then you go into the last workout, now you're even more tired, and then you try to lift a heavy bar and you flop it or you clark it. So the Open, if we look at the Open, there's a real big requisite need for capacity and muscle endurance. So you need to be building that. And then additionally, you do need to build strength. You do need to build power. But that's kind of my philosophy, is I super bias. I don't want to say super, because that makes it seem like I'm super extreme. I bias capacity and muscle endurance. If people come to me and they can't breathe and do burpees and pull-ups and air squats really well for 20 minutes, that's a problem. That's probably something we need to work on. Otherwise, you're not going to have a very fun or long stint in this sport.
So there's obviously a lot to unpack and a lot that we're not going to get to today, and that's certainly okay. But I think something for people listening as a good understanding maybe of what we're talking about, and I want to hear your opinion on this, because I think this could be controversial, but I think that that can make for a good conversation as well, is Haley Adams has great muscle endurance and capacity, okay, for everyone listening. And if you don't believe me, go watch any competition she's ever done. She's phenomenal, and she is elite at that. But to Sam's point about there is a prerequisite of strength that you need to have, well, you see that expressed, or the lack of that expression, in something like the games event, where it's a clean and run ladder of heavy cleans and 200-meter run repeats. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. I mean, obviously you're shaking your head, so I think you agree, but yeah. I'm curious to hear your expansion upon that.
Yes, I know exactly what you're getting at, and I'm going for it. So
yeah, go for it. I open the door.
Yeah. So if Haley Adams ever wants to win the games, she has to take a whole off season and focus primarily on improving her movement sequence and squatting and bending, and then improving strength in those patterns, and then minimizing capacity and muscle endurance training. Otherwise, she'll always probably be in the top 10, but she'll never get on the podium. And you mentioned it perfectly. You watch her at the clean event. You watched her at the semifinal at the MAC. She made 185, but barely on a second attempt. You watch the snatch. I think she didn't do that well at the games in the snatch. The games in 2019, she didn't do well in the clean. I mean, you just watch her movement too. I mean, you're right. I give her, and I don't want to take anything away from her. She's an amazing athlete. She has phenomenal, elite, one of the best engines in the game, and amazing muscle endurance, which is partly why she's so small and lean, because now she doesn't have as much muscle tissue that she has to fuel. So that's in her favor. However, her frame needs more robustness if she's ever going to compete with somebody like Tia or Annie, or even Amanda Barton. Well, no, who third was Horvath. Why am I blanking on who came third? Horvath, thank you. Now Horvath, she's an interesting situation too with her handstand push-ups, because she didn't get stress test as well this year. But we don't need to talk about her for right now. So Haley Adams, yes, back to your point, she's an example of the opposite end of the spectrum, where she needs time away from too many Metcons. I mean, and that's like what she's good at, but I don't think she'll ever do it because I think it's too uncomfortable for the atmosphere she's in to like drastically go against what they do. And I'm not saying like what they do is wrong. I'm just looking at Haley Adams as a unique individual with a very unique goal. And we got to look at all the facts. We got to look at reality. And right now, she's multiple standard deviations away from the top 4 or 5 women with regards to strength and power and movement quality with load. And that will always be a limiter because CrossFit's not just going to test Cindy and running and, those types of things that she's elite at. Like Dave's going to test you with those things that will expose you. So I think that's enough of bashing her.
No,
but it's reality.
And look, I don't want to be clear. All right, excuse me. I want to be clear. This is not a bash anybody session. I think this is a great example of what we're talking about with what is capacity, what is muscle endurance, and I think stories and visuals are a lot better at depicting those things than sometimes words are. And I think that's all we're going for here. And I know that, neither of us are being negative, and I want to make that clear.
Yeah.
But, as we're starting to wrap up, I want to ask a question that is, it's kind of loaded because I don't think it's an easy question, but it is a conversation I've had a lot with the folks around me, and it's kind of a debate. I'm on one side, they're on the other, and curious to hear what you think. To be the absolute best at something, and I don't care if it's golf, I don't care if it's CrossFit, swimming, diving, but to be the absolute best at something, do you think that it's a prerequisite to be obsessed and, call it what it is, unrelatable, possibly unlikable, and maybe even selfish, self-centered? Do you think you have to be those things to be the best?
Yeah, so that's the key, is what are we defining? It defines the best, which means you're the best in the world at a physical endeavor, which means, and it's an individual endeavor, it's not a team endeavor, that's different.
100%. It's absolutely very clear.
Yeah.
It's an individual.
Then you have to be exactly what you said. You have to be obsessed. You have to be selfish. You have to only care about your success, your training, your priorities. Your social system has to support you completely. You have to be cognizant of how you're exhausting energy outside of training. The perfect example, Matt Frazier didn't use a steak knife the whole year. Think about that. Like he didn't eat out for the whole season. Matt, I love that Matt has talked about these things because it just shows what the consummate professional is. Like there's so much attention to detail and there's so much self-prioritization that you need. Now, again, we need context. He's talking about being the best in the world. Now, if you're coming 1,000th in the quarterfinals, you might not necessarily need that level of OCD or obsessiveness. Like you might need to dial it back 5 notches. But there still needs to be, if you're going to have an individual pursuit towards a potential or a peak, there is a level of that's required that you need. Now, you have to take into context your social system, because if you have a partner or a spouse or a family, you don't want to burn the relationships for the sake of this. It's not worth it. So you need to be mindful in discussion with them and what's the expectation, because your social support system is very, very important. Matt's wife, fiance, she cooked everything for him. She did everything for him. His family supported him. He didn't have to worry about anything and just allowed himself to train and focus on winning. So that's very important. We got to have context. And can't look at anything at face value. So great question though, but I 100% agree with you. You have to be elite and the best.
You referenced social circle. You referenced the people around you. I'm a huge fan of this idea. You're the average of the 5 people that you spend your most time with, or you will become that in some iterative fashion. Coaches are becoming in my perspective, coaches are becoming the norm in CrossFit, as in like everyone has one, at least the folks that are doing it at the top. And I hear this, we'll call it objection, from a lot of people that I speak to that, for the most part, I would say are, whether it's bubble semifinal athletes or maybe they're, like you said, 1,000th in quarterfinals. So these are people that have context, have competitive aspirational goals. One of the biggest objections I hear is, well, look, I just can't afford a coach. And granted, we can talk about priorities and we can go into this, that, but this got brought up on a podcast 4 or 5 episodes ago, and I'd like to ask you this question: is if someone truly can't afford a coach, as being a coach to some of the elite and those aspiring to go to the games and semifinals, etc., what would your advice be to that person?
If they can't afford a coach?
Correct. But have aspirational goals of getting to the next level and realize in themselves like they need that because they don't know what they don't know.
Yes. Then you're probably just trying to hide. You need an excuse to not be vulnerable, to see whether or not you actually can do it. And so you hide behind, well, I can't financially make it. I can't pay for that. When in reality, if that was the sole thing you cared about and that was all that mattered, you would you would do whatever you need to do to pay the coach, to get the training, and to take care of yourself. So that's a really poor excuse, and I'm saying it's a front because they're afraid, and a lot of people are. I mean, it's very threatening to be vulnerable, to lay it out there and put everything into it, and then you come up short. Like, that's so disappointing and frustrating, and a lot of people aren't ready to handle that. They haven't they haven't like come to Jesus about it. Like, I'm ready to take on this, and it's okay. It's not for everyone. You got to remember that too. It's not for everyone.
Sam, this has been one of the most rewarding conversations that I've had so far, and I mean it. If you go back and listen to all the episodes, though I don't expect you to, I don't say that very often. So this has been one of the most rewarding ones. I genuinely appreciate your time, and I really do hope that we can do it again soon. Well,
thank you. I appreciate the thoughtful questions. A good conversation is a union between people. So you're as responsible as I am. So I appreciate you being thoughtful and doing your homework and really trying to open me up. And so thank you.
It was good, man. For people that want to work with you, people want to be coached by the Sam Smith, where can they find you? You've referenced all types of things, OPEX, Big Dawgs. Obviously, I'll put a little intro in the front half, but so people know who you are. But if people do want to work with you, where can they work with you?
So you could email me, sam@thebigdawgs.com, and then dogs is spelled DAWGS. Or you can direct message me on Instagram at Coach Sam Smith. Those would be the best ways to get a hold of me. And if you have any questions or anything, always feel free to reach out. I'm an open book.
Yeah, guys, I would highly recommend thebigdawgs.com, I believe is the website. Yeah, they've got their, and I think Sam writes a lot of their stuff, if not all of their stuff. Anyways, it's phenomenal. Their blog post, it's just an asset. If you, as an athlete, you're like, I don't know where to start. Just highly recommend go read their stuff. It's really educational. And as Sam says, it's very hard to write those things because being simple is not easy. Saying things as a matter of fact is not easy. Simple is not easy, my friend. So kudos to you.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. All right, Sam, be good. And to all of you, we will see you next time.